This is the story of the man who single-handedly invented the lovely internet pastime of watching shock videos of people dying. This is the incredible comedy of errors surrounding the man who is the first ever death recorded on film. You can watch this one. Straight up. You can go see it right now. It is historical footage that is archived in countless places, even here on YouTube. Now, I'm not going to put the footage on screen right now because this website is, let's face it, run by and made for gigantic cowards who over the years have done anything they can to bitch about everything they can, and who have worked to the bone to soften the edges of formerly boundary-breaking entertainment to the point of it being uninteresting. And I unfortunately have to bend to their whims if I want to make money and get any attention, so you don't get to see it. But if you do want to check out exactly what I'm talking about, there's half a dozen archives that have put this footage up on the internet. It'll be great supplemental footage to watch to fully understand what I'm about to tell you. This video is a spin-off of the Weird Deaths series, which is my cavalcade of videos looking at hilarious and highly unlikely ways that people have bitten the dust throughout history. This fat puppy of a knowledge load was a long time coming, and it's a big, round, happy baby to birth out of my comedy cranium, as you can tell by the runtime of this video. And it makes me happy for you, the viewer specifically, because I have seen a ton of you commenting on all of my videos to make sure that I didn't miss this one. If you're part of the 1 or 2% of people who didn't know this fun fact before, or you're uncomfortable watching old-timey footage of someone fucking jumping to their death, then I consider it my proud civic duty to tell you what happened to spare your sensitive eyeballs from having to see anything beyond my incredibly handsome visage. Franz Reichelt was a French inventor and tailor, and he wanted to spend his entire life dedicating himself to combining the two. That led Franz to develop a wearable parachute suit that he planned for pilots to wear as an escape means should they eject from their aircraft. Some of you silly billies out there probably scoffed and think this guy's a big dum-dum, but here comes a photo collage of wingsuit divers right now. This dude was onto something. Maybe a bit too early to get into that school of thought based on available materials for the time, but the gear turning made sense for someone of his skill sets. Franz basically wanted to make these things well before their debut in 1999. In 1910, Franz saw that airplanes were a hot, new, exciting commodity, but shit kept breaking and people kept getting hurt. Back then, cell phones didn't have airplane mode, so the pilots just had to deal with their planes crashing all the time because airplane mode totally does stuff, oh yeah. Now by this point, parachutes and rudimentary safety measures for air travel were a thing. Standardized parachutes for flight had been invented and proven, but the catch is, they only worked at high altitudes. Franz's aim was to create a device to help the common flyboy escape a death-defying nosedive when he drunkenly bails out of his biplane while buzzing the nearby crops of the rival farmers. And so, Franz's parachute suit was born. When interviewed by the Surrender Times, a famous French newspaper, he was quoted as saying, "World of Tanks might just be the bestest game ever made of all time ever." That's right, Frenchman who didn't even get to experience sliced bread in his lifetime. You can also take that opinion from me, Huggbees, a giant whose most impressive arsenal in his lineup at the gun show is his mind cannon. World of Tanks is a game featuring high-intensity combat, dynamic mechanics, and over 800 vehicles to choose from. And now, for the first time ever, tanks! Do you like money? So do I. And you know how much money I would spend to play World of Tanks? Absolutely nothing, because it's free to play, you dummy. World of Tanks has over 100 million players, and you better believe not all of them can be JP Rockefeller moneybags like I am. Get in there and give it a go. You've got nothing to lose except your time, which, let's face it, is better spent playing World of Tanks no matter what you're doing right now. While we're all on that ever-immortal crusade that we face to try to wreck the planet Earth as fast as possible, Which type of terrain do you like polluting for future generations the most? Are you an open field obliterator, a forest fire starter, or how about a desert decimator? Well, World of Tanks lets you tour all of those places and more using vehicles that not only blow holes everywhere they go, but trample everything that they ride on. Just driving these things destroys the environment. Hell yeah! Take that, nature! I'm playing video games! The game also features historically accurate models. Do you remember that thing that happened a while ago? It was, World War II? Well, if the tank was in that war, it's probably in the game. Click the link in the description or use invite code COMBAT for a Cromwell B British tank, 250k credits, 7 days of premium access, and a 10-day battle tank rental for 3 tanks, including a cool German tank, a radical American tank, and a polite but firm Chinese tank. I don't really know tanks, but they look cool to me. Sign up now with code COMBAT and play a video game for absolutely nothing and help me earn my sponsorship money. It's win-win and a much cooler thing to collect than anime girls or trading cards. World of Tanks, the game you should be playing instead of attending your grandmother's funeral. Smooth segue, am I right? Can you blame me? Okay, now that funny goof is over and I've made a fat stack of cash, Franz was interviewed by a handful of French newspapers about his invention, and he actually was quoted as saying, "My new invention is like nothing else. It's constructed basically half in waterproof fabric and half in silk. Thanks to a system of rods and belts that one can control, the parachute deploys during a fall and will save a pilot's life." Initially, his idea wasn't super stupid at all, actually. Preliminary tests had Franz strapping prototype models to dummies and chucking them out of buildings. Franz specifically noted that a strapped-in dummy thrown off a 5-story building had a significantly lighter impact on the ground than if he just heave-hoed his stepson out a crash test dummy off the roof. But there's this problem in physics you may have heard of. This is a little thing. It's called scale. Things in physics tend to scale with each other, and all of the things in physics are accounted for when accounting for scaling. Franz's prototypes weren't wearable suits. They were wing-style parachutes that used 65 square feet of material and weighed 150 pounds. Yeah, when you chuck that off a balcony, there's a good chance the wind drag is gonna help you quite a bit. But by this point, you're just making another parachute. Franz needed this thing to be portable, and more importantly, wearable, so he could show up to Paris Fashion Week without looking so last season. Eventually, that stupid thing called math caught up to him, and things just weren't adding up. Finding a design that proved both light enough to be worn but sturdy enough to be effective seemed impossible. While different combinations and designs yielded improvement, none of them actually provided a positive result. Things got really desperate on the aviation side as well. In 1911, a year named after a handgun, Mr. Colonel Lalance wrote a letter to the Aero Club de France. Or the Aero Club de France, whatever. He said, "Back in 1910, I put up some big dick money by slapping 5,000 francs down on the table for any one of you who could develop a successful low-altitude parachute. None of you motherfuckers were up to the task. This time in the year 1911, I am doubling the reward. I will give 10,000 francs to anyone who successfully builds a low-altitude parachute. Have fun, fuckos." This really put a fire under Franz's ass, mostly because he had fallen asleep reading the story while under his heated blanket, but partially because he knew his invention just had to be the thing that solved this problem. The rules of Colonel Lalance's bounty said the device had to weigh less than 55 pounds. Franz tried and tried to tweak what he had, but the best he could do was 100 pounds, and every test he performed was still turning up dead dummies. Franz was frustrated. He was flabbergasted, and he was fucked. Nothing was working. Everything was too heavy, too cumbersome, and too ineffective. So he scratched his mustache. And he scratched it some more. His was much larger than mine, but just imagine. And he scratched it, and he scratched it, and he scratched it until he thought, what if the problem isn't the shape or the size? It's the materials being used. So he looked over at his contraptions and the gears started turning. And then he said, "Eureka! I've got it! Someone move these stupid test dummies out of the way for my perfectly usable materials! I've got to throw myself off a fucking building!" And so, Franz began live subject trials. That is, of course, if you ignore the joke I made earlier of him throwing his stepson out the window. He was actually unmarried his whole life. You know, it turns out putting "obsessed with parachute pants" on your dating profile doesn't exactly attract the ladies. Suck my dick, 1982. French newspapers at the time reported that in 1911, Franz had predicted what US stockbrokers would be doing in only 10 years' time, and was leaping out of windows. He jumped from a height of around 30 feet in a test run of his suit, and he escaped totally unharmed, because he landed on a pile of straw. His suit didn't do a goddamn thing. But it didn't stop him either. He tried another roughly 30-foot jump and this time broke his leg. And as he sat on the ground pondering what the problem was, he allegedly slapped his forehead and went, "Oh, duh, gravity, how could I forget?" By this point, rather stupidly, Franz was totally ready to go. He wanted to jump from the Eiffel Tower to solidify this bad boy invention as an invention that totally didn't fucking work, but surely it'd work if someone jumped off something famous with it. But the French government, in a surprising move counterintuitive to their nature, didn't surrender the jump permit to Franz, and initially denied his request. He was able to conduct 2 different test runs from the first publicly open deck of the towers with dummies, but they, of course, resulted in failure. For an entire year, Franz begged with the French government and said, "Please, please let me jump off the tower. Come on, I want to. I want to jump off the tower. Oh, come on, please. No one's using it. It's just there. What do you even do with it? Radio? That's stupid. I want to jump off the tower. Come on, I'll be your best friend." Until finally the government heaved a heavy sigh and said, "Okay, fine, you can jump from the top of the Eiffel Tower, but this counts as your Christmas present, so don't cry to me when you don't get anything." Franz was overjoyed, not only because he finally got the publicity stunt for his invention that he was looking for, but because he knew the government couldn't resist getting him a Christmas present, and he'd all likely still be getting something on that holiday season, something slightly less extravagant than normal, but a gift nonetheless. February 1912 rolls around, and Franz holds a press conference. He framed the Eiffel Tower in the background and pointed at it and said, "You see that shit over there? Some serious shit's gonna go down there this Sunday. Be there!" Okay, this part of the story is actually pretty cool, because as I mentioned earlier, this whole thing was caught on film. Now, again, I really am not sure what I can and can't show for monetization issues, and also, thinking about it, who knows what weird copyrights are gonna be like changing hands throughout all these years. If you want to see this whole next part in all of its actual detail, just takes a little Googling. Sunday, February 4th. Franz rolls up to the tower with his posse, already decked out in his fly suit. That's an incredible double entendre. And this latest variation was actually very impressive to the spectators. The suit didn't restrict movement or seem too heavy at all like previous versions. And according to Franz, all you had to do to activate it was fully extend out your arms like Jesus. You know, you pull fat Jesus pose, and ironically, you won't be seeing him anytime soon. Police had gathered at the scene to keep a perimeter and to control crowds that came to watch. But after Franz's arrival, the police on the scene began to scratch their chins and mutter amongst themselves. There were whispers of them seeming to not understand what the publicity stunt actually was. The heads of the local PD kept muttering, "Wait a minute, where's the dummy? Where's the dummy? What's he going? Why is he wearing the suit? He's not going to jump, is he? He's just showcasing the suit on himself just to show it off, and then he's going to hunk another chunk of anthropomorphic plastic down there, right? Why do we sound like Owen Wilson? Wow, look at him. He's got his suit on and everything. Wow. You know, I think this could be a crazy idea. I'm just going to throw this out there. You don't have to believe me, but maybe he's actually going to jump himself. That'd be spectacular. Wow." Franz certainly didn't let anyone second-guess themselves, though. He told everyone present that he was going to be the one jumping. Those around him at the time were genuinely fucking shocked because apparently they assumed he was just going to use a dummy. The friends that he drove to the jump site with began to say things like, "Oh, good one, Franz. Seriously, where's the dummy? You had your fun, fashion modeled your suit for Paris Fashion Week, you won Best in Show. Now get the dummy out of the trunk that we put in the trunk and you totally didn't take out before we came here and put it in the suit." The dummy is in the trunk, right, Franz? But Franz didn't even fucking blink. The dude was ready. He was like Oppenheimer in that movie I never watched and probably never will. He was ready to face the consequences of his actions, and he told everyone around him that he was now the strongest man on the planet with the biggest wiener. Again, I never saw the movie. The winds that day were particularly strong, and none of the prep work for this stunt included any safety measure for an actual person. All Franz could respond back with was, translated from the original French, "I want to try the experiment myself, and without trickery, as I intend to prove the worth of my invention." Now people were getting antsy, because this was fucking stupid. This dude spent years completely unsuccessfully testing this device, and now somehow he's ready to go with it without a single positive test result under his belt? This is where critics really got word of what was happening and had something to say. One particularly sharp witness butted in and mentioned, besides the total lack of safety considerations and high winds, that the tower itself was still not high enough to perform the deployment correctly. Franz replied, "You are going to see how my 72 kilos and my parachute will give your arguments the most decisive of denials." If there were ever a phrase to represent the 20th century version of "I'll make you eat those words, bitch," I think we just heard it. Finally, after all this mucking about, someone made the logical connection that this man wasn't a genius inventor who was going to astound the world with his creation. Someone finally deduced that this guy was kind of stupid, and his ambitions and obsessive passion were getting to his head. And that man was Gassion. Gassion was a guard who worked at the Eiffel Tower, and as soon as he saw Franz's bulky ass trying to scale the entranceway to get into leaping position, he moved himself in front of the laundry sheet wearing dunderhead and told him, "Nuh-uh, not today, you ain't, oh, no, you are not doing this, not on my tower, not my Eiffel Tower, oh, no, bye-bye. Gassion wasn't fully in the wrong here, and in fact he had damn good reason to tell Franz to fuck off. Since Gassion worked at the tower, he witnessed all the previous tests that Franz had done there with the dummies, and made the very obvious observation that none of his stuff worked, and this guy very likely could just be operating on pure blind faith rather than giving a shit about self-preservation. Soon some superiors gave Gassion a call, and there were lots of shouting and rambling, and Franz was literally noted as highly upset, white-knuckled, and totally rattled over the whole thing, but then Gassion shrugged his shoulders and said, "All right, okay, you got the permits, you got the clearance, go game over yourself, whatever, I guess." So Franz, the entourage he arrived with, and a cinematographer were allowed to ascend the tower. Franz walked partially up the stairs, turned around to the crowd and said, "See you soon," before he continued his death march. A second cameraman was at the base of the tower, and well, if you watch the footage, you know exactly what happens next. I'm gonna go ahead and narrate it explicitly for all of you blubbering pussies out there who are like, "I don't want to watch someone die." Franz lined a restaurant table up against the railing and peered over to the crowd below, which had about 30 journalists and spectators in it by now. Franz currently was 187 feet above the ground, which is about 13 stories give or take for reference. To check the current wind speed, Franz ripped a page out of a book and threw it in the air, and after seeing it blow around a bunch, which I'm assuming was a scientific declaration, he said, "Yep, the wind's blowing all right," and that was the end of that. The group up on the tower with Franz noted in interviews that he was calm and smiling the entire time before the jump. He did linger on the edge for around a minute, but that was probably him just debating whether or not he should do a sick flip or save that for the second time he jumped. And then he jumped, and his invention failed to deploy, and he died on impact. Because of the unfortunately restrictive and downright ridiculous rules of this failure of a free expression website, I can't show you raw footage of a man dying. But I can utilize my free expression to help you imagine how it went. It basically happened like this. Now this moment brings up the absolute most interesting part of this entire thing to me. If you pay attention to the footage and read witness testimony, his parachute suit did not deploy correctly. It folded around him like a nice warm hug, except one that would kill you, and it didn't billow out like it was supposed to. And I just can't stop thinking, what if Franz was right? What if he really had perfected his device this time? What if the winds were more cooperative? Or if the prototype actually was functional and worked? What if this dude was on the edge of a breakthrough, finally got his life-saving invention right, and a combination of user error and bad publicity just scrubbed the entire thing from history? And could there be a possibility, an alternate timeline, where even with all of this, Franz landed on the ground below, maybe just broke some bones and lived to further revise his inventions? I almost want to say that could be the case. I really, really do. But there's one more really big problem with the day that Franz chose to jump. See, there's a lot of tidbits of this story that point to the threat posed by strong winds. Franz's friends warned him about it, Franz mentioned he hadn't measured them, and the best test he concocted seconds before the jump for the winds was to throw some paper into them and guess how fast they were going. While the intense wind speed certainly didn't help, the gale velocity might not have been the issue here. Franz's trouble may have been with how cold the winds were. This stunt took place in early February, which is still smack dab within the winter season. The soil that Franz had landed on had frozen well before his jump. Franz impacted the ground on a surface that potentially may have been harder than concrete. If he had just waited for better weather, he could have landed on something maybe much, much softer and maybe saved his life. Now, some of you are going to say that this is far-fetched, and I'm going to fling that Pokemon right back in your face with historical facts. In 1964, a woman named Christiane Coquinton, I think that's right, jumped from the Eiffel Tower and also fell about 180 feet, roughly the same distance as Franz. But she survived entirely because she landed on a car that cushioned her fall. It's not the speed of anything that kills you, it's the stopping. And Franz's Mach-speed sumo wrestling match with the Earth unfortunately was never going to end in his favor, thanks to tundra temperature topsoil taking its time and terminating his test trial. Franz landed on pure icy solid ground that hit so hard, his list of fatal injuries was extensive, immediate, impressive, and would all make really good death metal song titles.
Crushed right leg, pulverized right arm, exploded skull, shattered spine, bleeding from the mouth, nose, and ears, eyes fixated wide open, and his pupils fully dilated.
Franz was really fucking dead. He was rushed to a hospital just so people could feel better, I guess, but he was pronounced dead the instant he arrived. There's also some discussion floating around that Hans actually died of a heart attack immediately after jumping, but from what I could find, it's speculatory and most likely untrue, because even if he went into full cardiac arrest right after jumping, he hit the ground and suffered fatal injuries well before the heart attack would have a chance to kill him completely. Plus, if you watch the footage, you can see one of two things happening. First of all, Franz's body is carried out of the way by a group of onlookers. Now, the stretcher and medical stability was used in regular practice as early as the 18th century, and general medical knowledge was definitely to never move an injured person unless it's absolutely required. The fact a gaggle of dudes picked this guy up after his skull and spine were obliterated doesn't mean he was injured and being carried off to safety in case a second guy decided to jump jump and landed on top of him, it meant he was dead as fuck. Second, some spectators went ahead and measured the literal crater left in the ground from the Frenchman's impact. If you left a measurable crater into a patch of frozen ground with your body, things really aren't looking good for you. I unfortunately can't find the measurement they took anywhere, so let's just call it Wile E. Coyote sized. And then what happened? Well, the press immediately got their grubby paws all over this story, as they tend to do. None of them entertained the idea that this was a self-game over attempt, but all of them rode the idea of this guy was either an idiot or totally insane. As for the people who went with him, one of his friends from the entourage said that Franz needed to make this whole thing a big hoopla in order to help sales of his product and legitimize the device and patents on it. And okay, I see you guys in the back with your fistful of tomatoes and your pitchforks and your torches and your lips deliciously puckered into an O shape so that you can fling out a fat stack of booze, because you guys want me to tell you about the part where this stunt ruined it for everyone else, don't you? After this little debacle, the French government became very scrupulous when it comes to granting permission to do things on the Eiffel Tower, besides hanging out on the publicly open decks and taking a piss on the side of it. Another inventor named Blanc, who was also making parachutes, was totally denied the request to launch himself from the structure thanks to Franz's fuck-up. Now these days it is a bit of a sport for adrenaline anarchy junkies to do illegal base jumping from the tower just to give a big send-up to my main man F-Dog. Hell, one of them happened a month ago. This stuff still happens. Now conspiracy theorists would lead you to believe this is more attributed to the fact that base jumping off prominent structures and landmarks is a time-honored reckless thrill-seeker tradition, but I know deep in my heart they're all doing it to worship at the Church of the Flying Tailor. That was his posthumous nickname, by the way. Franz was given the nickname the Flying Tailor in honor of his stunt. Realistically, he should have been called the Crater Tailor or the Flying Hospice, but whatever. And don't worry, the police did whatever they could to cover their tracks of the whole thing as well. Louis Lapine, the head of the police at the time, said that they had only ever been notified of the parachute experiments taking place with dummies, and had no idea Franz was planning to jump himself. They made a statement that if they knew that he was actually going to leap from the tower, they never would have allowed him up there. That's right, they made an official statement saying that they would have made an exception if he was cooler and not crazy. To directly quote Louis Lapine, not only did that big blubbering pussy not even do a flip, but he hesitated for like a whole minute before he jumped. What a fucking loser. I would have gone up and jumped twice by the time he did all that goofy shit. The only upside of this whole stunt is that I got to steal one of his vertebrae when no one was looking. It was poking out of the base of his neck, so I just pried it off with a wrench and put it in my pocket during all the chaos. I keep it in a jar of formaldehyde and it gives me sweeter dreams. One time I dreamt I was the president and my first executive order was to cancel all homework forever and take 200 trips to Disneyland a year. God bless America. No, Huggbees didn't write this quote for me 100 years after my death. Why do you ask? So let's cut to the modern day, where this trivia factoid becomes a fun, digestible nugget thanks to the fact it happened a long time ago to not upset anyone who doesn't like death and stuff. Now, I'm sure many of you guys watching drew parallels from this story to Lawn Chair Larry, the guy who sailed across California in a lawn chair tied to some weather balloons, who I made an incredible video on that I'll go ahead and link in the description. In that video, and minor spoilers because I know you're gonna watch it since I make the literal best videos on this entire website, I praise Larry for combining reasonable safety prep with a sly skirting of some silly laws to accomplish his dream in a way that realistically could only end up harming himself, if anyone. But in this scenario, I gotta say, I think Franz is kind of just a fucking idiot. The dude definitely seems to have been caught up in the fervor and excitement of the whole spectacle, which caused him to neglect common sense and safety measures at every turn. Now, I know what it's like to be in a whirlwind of attention. I once spent 6 years running a cult where people thought I was Jesus Christ's brother, and I ended it because I just had too much money, like too much. I couldn't reasonably spend it all. But if you're gonna go through with stunts like this, you've got to at least do the appropriate prep work. Likening an impulsive jump to flimsy excuses like needing to drum up attention or needing to legitimize patents is just foolish and putting flash before substance. You know what would have helped sell your idea better, Franz? If it fucking worked. Even so, I get wanting to be a high flyer throughout life, and I'm actually a big fan of taking life-demolishing risks in the name of greatness. But how fucking hard would it have been to build an old-timey crash pad at the bottom of the tower, or attach yourself to some sort of harness or a bungee cord type thing? Anything. Now, I can't exactly say I know what would have been done back in the 1900s to protect wannabe Batman here from dying, but I do know that something could have been done instead of absolutely nothing. His friends could have tackled his ass to the ground before he jumped. The guard at the guard tower could have defied orders when he realized that the situation was way more complicated than he could possibly make out. The police could have interviewed him before organizing the perimeter, and upon finding out that he was going to go off himself over the rail, they could have given him a fat middle finger, especially since they claimed after his death they never would have let something like this happen in the first place if they hadn't known that it was going to be him jumping. Boy, isn't that a convenient fucking excuse. This whole story wraps up like a cascading event of pure bystander effect. People knew this was going to be a shit show, but through a combination of shirking responsibility fully onto the man at the center of attention and belief that maybe this just might work, no one did anything. And a fanatical man died in, well, on the plus side, probably the exact way he'd want to die. I do propose that Franz could have survived under more favorable wind or temperature conditions, but this whole thing was a farce from the start, and a risk that definitely didn't need to be taken in any way. I mean, everyone saw that while this dude did initially have successful prototypes in the beginning with dummies, he didn't have a single successful test with his newest compact design or off of the Eiffel Tower. Why on God's green earth would anyone let him go through with this? I just realized how ironic it is that I said God's green earth, because that's what did him in. Ah, well, I seem to be at the point of the video where I give my own analytical take on the whole thing, so there's probably not much left to say, right? All I've got left in my notes here is that the film of Franz's plunge has an IMDb page. Why isn't that just super? He even plays himself in the movie. I thought he'd be played by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, because that guy's in everything, but I'm happy to see that he stepped up to the plate for his first acting gig. Oh. You know what? Speaking of IMDb and all that, there's one more thing I gotta tell you. I lied. I lied straight to your face. Put up the IMDb page of the other video. Franz Reichelt's death isn't the first death ever recorded on film. This topic's actually under a big amount of debate and scrutiny as to what is the first death ever recorded on film. Many people think it's a self-terminating jump of a New York City woman in 1938 that was broadcast internally to the NBC broadcasting station because they had a cameraman coincidentally able to capture the shot while he was out testing equipment. But the existence of Franz's film outright disproves that, because 1912 comes before 1938, and that's really obvious, and a grade schooler could tell you that, and it proves that people just don't fucking Google anything whatsoever. But the trend continues even to Franz's film. Franz's death was reported as the first ever caught on film as a viral internet fact, and still is to this day. But that's wrong. Sort of. The title more likely but debatably belongs to William Carr, thanks to his execution being filmed all the way back in 1897. The story of William Carr in itself is pretty lengthy, but here's the spark notes. William Carr was a child murderer who was sentenced to hanging. A filmographer by the name of Frederick Guth volunteered in filming the execution. He filmed about 10 minutes of the entire affair and showcased it at tons of local theaters and phonograph stores. This film got a bunch of attention back in the day. I mean, it was the faces of death of its era. And then, poof, it's gone. It is just gone, probably destroyed forever. Keep in mind, back then, 10 minutes of film was over 1,000 feet of film. And keeping that stuff super pristine and neat and ready for the future just wasn't in the cards for century-old preservation techniques. There's some old photos and stills of the event that exist to prove that it actually happened and was recorded, and there's also tons of articles and witness testimony verifying the legitimacy of the whole thing, but does that count. If we define the first death ever recorded on film as it meaning someone took a video of it, then yes, case closed. William Carr was the first and Franz Reichelt was very likely second until further information finds more old-timey tragedies for us to giggle at, but from what I could find, those are the first two. But if we define first death ever recorded on film to mean currently recorded on film right now, as in there is film of it that exists and it is the oldest film that exists of this subject, then Franz wins, because there is no surviving footage of the car hanging. It's a question of whether the act of being filmed or the state of existing on film qualifies for the answer we're looking for. Either way, I have just embarrassed quite a handful of fun fact know-it-all contemporaries, and that's good enough for me. And speaking of death, I know I would just die if I didn't check out Huggbees Gamer Mode, my brand new gaming channel that you can find linked in the description right here on YouTube. Oh man, is it a silly time full of great stuff you want to see, including regular uploads to tide you over while I work on big projects and help you forget about the fact that each and every one of us is going to die no matter what. Go check it out, subscribe to it, like this video, comment with your favorite type of cookies down below to confuse everyone who hasn't seen the rest of the video yet. Make me a multimillionaire so I can spend it on things to improve your life with as well. Retweet all my tweets and post my stuff on Reddit. Do everything in your fucking power to further the cult of Huggbees, and you will be rewarded in the afterlife by me personally, and I am allowed to sell out like this because I do it ironically. I really don't care. I mostly just want to make sure you found this video entertaining. But I do like money. I like money a lot. And don't forget to try out World of Tanks with the invite code COMBAT and the link in the description. Hurry, World War III might break out at any minute, and you don't want to look like an idiot, do you?